Well, now that we've introduced a basic framework, some definitions, we've kind of got the pot stirring a little bit. Let's really jump into the interpretive journey. This is topic number 2 of our course, Cross-Cultural Communications. And man, in this topic, we begin to really put in the work, right? And we're putting in the work towards effective cross-cultural communications. There's a quote in this book. It says, "The first step toward meeting the needs of our listeners with a word from God is to learn how to interpret and apply the Bible ourselves." There is no shortcut to interpretation. I wish there was, because it would be a lot easier, but there isn't, and you just need to know that. So if we're just in a rhythm of asking ChatGPT, that's not interpretation, right? It's just going to make something up, and you won't even know how to tell the difference. And similarly, if somebody comes along preaching a new gospel or something that is inconsistent with what we see in the scriptures, how would we even know what to do? How would we even know that it's wrong? We have to be able to do interpretation. Interpretation is the key. So the preacher feels a tension to not only preach a sermon that is biblically faithful, but it's also culturally relevant. I don't know about you, but I've for sure felt that pressure. So to successfully navigate this tension, the preacher must know how to interpret and apply the Bible for himself. Like, we have to know how to do the work ourselves. So the process of reading, interpreting, applying the Bible, it's called the interpretive journey. And so this journey helps the preacher kind of navigate just to use an analogy, it kind of helps us navigate a river of differences that separate the contemporary audience from the meaning of the text, so that the text can be applied. In other words, how do we navigate this cultural, this ancient truth to our cultural current setting? Right, that's the interpretive journey. That's the river that we're talking about, and the interpretive journey is not short. It's really long. It takes work, it takes study, it takes effort, and it takes prayer. So often what I've seen is that preachers attempt to cross this river, this interpretive journey, this river, and they do it by using intuitive or their own intuition, or just kind of this feels right type of approach. And this means that if it appears that the text can be applied directly, then the preacher just applies it directly, right? If they're just kind of using their own intuition and not the right tools, right? And if this is not the case, then what happens is often the preacher will spiritualize the meaning of the text, and sometimes he'll try to find a hidden meaning, a meaning that nobody else has ever in the history of time ever concluded, but now they know what's going on. That's what we want to try to avoid. That's what happens when we do this without proper interpretation skills. So neither of these approaches will allow the preacher to safely cross the other side of the river. Only a proper journey, right? The interpretive journey, proper interpretation provides a consistent approach that can be applied to any passage, so that we can just successfully navigate this journey. So there's 5 steps that I want to outline for you in this interpretive journey. The first, we would just say, is to grasp the text in their town. So when we say their town, the key question is what did the text mean to the biblical audience? Right? To the original audience, what did this mean? To answer this question, we have to do some homework. So it involves a few different things as we're trying to grasp the text in their own town. What did the text mean to the biblical audience? Then we want to read the text carefully. These are things how we're doing the work, right? We read the text very, very carefully. We make as many observations as possible. We analyze the text in light of the chapters before it and the chapters after it. We analyze the text in the light of paragraphs. So when we see, hey, this was all a singular idea in a singular paragraph, right? And the stories that come before and after, everything around it, we want to read, we want to understand. Then we say that the preacher must become familiar with the context. So again, this is the passage. The passage's literary and historical cultural context. So the literary context relates to both the genre. The literary genre, is this poetry? Is this apocalyptic? Is this a gospel? Is this history? So it relates to both the genre and the surrounding context of the passage. So the historical context involves information about the biblical writer, the biblical audience, and any other kind of historical, cultural elements addressed in the passage. So what's going on, big picture, outside of the scripture, because that affects the audience for sure. So we're familiar with the original context. Next, we want to do a more in-depth analysis of the passage. So this is kind of the stage of the study, if you will, in interpretation that we as the preacher, if we have some skills in the biblical languages, the original languages, this is where we're talking about translation and analyzing the original biblical text. If we don't have those skills, that's okay. If we've never been taught Greek or Hebrew, you don't have to know Greek or Hebrew or Aramaic in order to study the text well. You can do that in your native language, but I would also say there is a ton of online helps that are available for Greek and Hebrew and Aramaic, and so look at those things, use those things, because what I do when I'm doing this work is I'm interpreting, I'm doing translation work myself. I'm trying to identify major commands versus just verbs, and what are supporting verbs, and all of those things come into effect for what is actually happening. So we're doing super deep analysis here. And then finally, we consult outside commentaries. Commentaries in order to better understand the background, the context, the syntax, the theology of a passage. I literally had somebody ask me just recently about a sermon that I was preaching in the book of Hebrews, a study we were doing in my church. And he said, hey, what book can I read that gets you like all the information that you're getting? And so I sent him a text message with a picture. And there was a stack of about, huge stack of like 8 different books. And I said, these are what I'm reading right now for the book of Hebrews. And he was like, all of those? And I said, I look at all of them every single week. So we want to look outside after we've done the work, the biblical work. Then we want to look at outside commentaries to give us all of that information. So once we've this is step 1, right? Grasping the text, and it's super deep. So once we get there, then we go from step 1 to step number 2, like measuring the width of the river, right? If we're kind of thinking about this interpretive journey as a river, we measure the length of the river, right? We're continuing to kind of cross. What are we going to have to do? Here's what we're asking as we measure the width of the river to cross. What are the differences and the similarities between the biblical audience and us? Like, what are the differences? Like, where culturally, what's going on in the biblical audience? We've already done that work. And then comparing that to us, like what's happening here. Was there political upheaval then? Is there political upheaval now? Right? Those sorts of things are the things that we're questioning. Is this an agrarian culture? Are we in an agrarian culture? Is this a suburban culture? Are we in a suburban culture? So we get to kind of see these things, what's similar and what's different. Really important for us to understand. The primary differences is what we're kind of looking. Step number 3, we say cross the principalizing bridge. I know that's a big word. It's hard for me to say, right? Even my spell check doesn't like it. Principalizing bridge. Here's what we're asking. What is the theological principle in this text? It's incredibly important for us to understand and want to identify what is the major theological principle in this text. So we're asking, as we ask this, this step does a couple different things, right? So it allows us to kind of cross this from biblical world into the contemporary world. And what I mean is we're looking for timeless theological truths that are reflected in the text, right? And those timeless theological truths should be written out. We should understand in present tense statements that summarize the meaning of the text, right? So we want to evaluate the theological principles that we're identifying. So is this principle strongly tied and reflected in the biblical text? Like, is it there? Another question we're asking is the principle timeless and universal, or is it attached to a particular situation? This is important. I'll summarize this in a second. And lastly, we're asking, is the principle transcultural, or is it bound to only one specific culture? So what we're trying to identify here is when we read instructions, when we have commands, right, and we read these things in the scripture, we're trying to identify, was that a command given to that particular person specifically for that time, right? Or is this a command or a principle, right? This is what we're talking about, the principalizing bridge. Is this a principle that should be timeless? It should surpass both time and culture, right? So love your neighbor as yourself, for example. Is that something that's only for that place and time? That's the only time? Or is this a principle that we see repeated throughout Scripture and in multiple contexts that we should pass down? Well, that's something we should pass down, right? It's not just specific to that particular context. So we're also asking, is the principle harmonious with teaching of the rest of the Scripture? This is exactly what I'm saying, right? So when we read narrative passages in the Old Testament, it says to conquer this enemy. Does that mean that enemy is a mortal enemy for the rest of our lives forever and ever and ever, and we should always conquer them? Well, we don't see that throughout all of the Scripture, right? So is it harmonious with the teachings of the rest of the Scripture? Or is the... Let me get it up here. Is the principle congruent with similarities and differences between the two audiences? So are there similar? Is the Scripture the same, right? Does it go along with the things that are happening in the context there in the Scripture and in our context? And then we also ask, is the principle relevant to both the biblical and contemporary audience? Here's the thing. These timeless theological truths, as we look at them, right, they're reflected in the text. We should write them out, again, in present tense statements to summarize the meaning of the text. We have to cross this bridge, this principalizing bridge, to identify these things that should be taught over and over. Next, we say step number 4 is consult the biblical map. Right, we want to look at what the greater biblical narrative says. So how does our theological principle fit with the rest of the Bible? So this places the text in conversation with the rest of Scripture to confirm that this principle correlates with the rest of the Bible. Additionally, in this step, if the reader is studying, say, an Old Testament passage, then the principle must be seen throughout the grid of the New Testament as well, right? Or the New Testament will often add to or modify a principle from the Old Testament. So as a result, at the end of this step, the reader may need to rework some of the theological principles as well. Step number 5, I told you there was 5. Here's the last one, is what we call grasp the text in our town. And again, in our town is us, right? How does this look to us? So we're asking, how should individual Christians today apply the theological principle in their lives? How do we make this relevant for us? I kind of use 3 key phrases. I'm going to give you these phrases next. So observe first. We observe the key elements of how theological principles address the original audience. So we're looking for the major ways that this talks to the original audience. Then we're looking for a parallel situation that includes all of the same elements. So is there other scriptures that fall into place or with us? Like we said, is there political upheaval in both places? So parallel situations that include all of the same, like persecution or fear or doubt or whatever it may be. And then we make application very, very specific, right? And we can say, hey, this from point A, this is apples to apples, right? This connects from 1 to 2. So again, we're kind of rolling down this road on our interpretive journey. It's not easy. It takes work. It takes a lot of determination. It takes a lot of prayer. But listen, it is critical to successful cross-cultural communications.